Representatives of the Swedish Institute, Sofia and Cecilia, Andrae, thank you so much. We're going to kick off our next two sessions on research and strategy, starting with the Swedish Institute and followed by Enterprise Estonia. Both of those organizations we're very proud to work with and supply the Global Soft Power Index data to feed into their work. So the session title is How Can Country Image Data Feed into Strategic Communication and Promotion? Country communication and promotion should ideally build on analysis, but common obstacles are lack of data, time, and sometimes skills. During the workshop, the Swedish Institute will share experiences and key takeaways from combining perception data and media monitoring in analyzing the image of Sweden in dynamic times, as well as providing strategic and operational insights to Sweden communication and promotion activities. I'll hand over now to Sofia and Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Konrad. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Sofia from the Swedish Institute. I'm head of unit for the Image of Sweden Analysis Unit at the Swedish Institute. And we're going to talk about a little bit what Konrad said, how we use this data from the Global Soft Power Index and combine it with other data that we have to inform decisions on different levels, operational levels, tactical levels, and also strategic levels. First up, we'll start with the mission. We come from the Swedish Institute, which is a governmental organization. We report to the Foreign Ministry in Sweden. And our work spans over many different areas. We share information about Sweden internationally. We analyze the image of Sweden abroad. We facilitate international exchanges and collaborations. And we increase Sweden's visibility in the world and on the global stage. The idea is to foster, of course, strong relationships with different parts of the world, individuals and organizations. And the work, of course, I think you all heard this morning, it's about influence and attraction. But I think something that we really have seen during this last few years is that it's also about something else. We have another layer of importance for our work. We're now a part of Sweden's psychological defense. In Sweden, we now have an agency for psychological defense, and the Swedish Institute and all other organizations that communicate Sweden, promote Sweden, we're all a part of that work. So Sweden's global image now is seen as a key element in Sweden's national security strategy. So this adds another layer to our work. Before it was more promotion, influence and attraction, all the things that we talked about, but now we're also in a new area of national security. We are responsible for the official communication of Sweden. So if you go to social media and you type in Sweden, all the official accounts are the Swedish Institute behind. We also support the different embassies and missions around the world. We don't have any offices abroad, apart from in Paris, in France. We have a culture house that we run. But we work through the embassies. So the main goal is to provide material to the embassies and to provide them with different tools so they can run the promotion activities. Cecilia and I, we work with analyzing the image of Sweden abroad. And we have three different sources, you can say, that we use. We analyze the media image of Sweden. We collect perception data on Sweden. We have the Global Soft Power Index, of course, but we also conduct our own studies. And we follow the Sweden's performance with different type of open data, international indices, and other things that we can collect. And of course, the starting point for Sweden, I'm not sure if you know where to find us in the Global Soft Power Index, but last year we ranked number 12 out of the 193 countries. So of course, that's a very, very good starting point for a small country like Sweden. And I think we've seen that since we have a strategy that we created in 2012. And I think we've always run this sort of positive image. We know that we have great assets to use, Of course, they come from the strong governance pillar. You can see that also in the Global Soft Power Index, and also, of course, the value-based. We have very value-based promotion that we also run. And if you know the World Value Survey, you would find Sweden in the top right corner, which means that we're standing out a bit when it comes to values. A very secular and very individualistic country. So that is sort of the starting point. So let me tell you a little bit more about the media image that we follow. So we have a tool today which collects a huge amount of data. It's a commercial tool where we search for Sweden and related concepts in 53 languages. We have also created an alert system where we can get an alert if something is happening somewhere in the world, if someone is talking about Sweden in media, in social media, in blogs or in forums, we get an alert. Every day we get about 4 or 5 or 10 alerts depending on what happens in the world. So our colleagues, they monitor what happens, they write it down, and if something really important happens, we report this to the government. And also every week we have a meeting on Wednesday, so today we will report also to the government what we see in these media flows. We have a capacity of collecting about 10 million data points each month, so it's a lot of data, of course, that we have access to. Usually we get about 4 million data points each month. So this is something that we can dig into, we can analyze what narratives are out there about Sweden, what are the things that people are talking about in different forums. Of course, you know, social media has a different logic from news media, so this is also something that we can monitor. And also, of course, we can put that information back to the people that work with the official Sweden channels. So right now on X, people are talking about this when it comes to Sweden, for example. And then we can use that information to sort of craft the communication that we want to send out. This is an example. I see it's very small in writing here, but this is the total volume of the posts that we've seen on Sweden. This is both media and social media. If you would take social media out of the equation here, it would be quite different. But if you put everything up here, you can see that the first largest one was the burning of the Holy Quran outside Turkish embassy in Sweden, 2003. So we've had a series of these events where a Swedish Danish citizen and also later an Iraqi citizen burned the Holy Quran in Sweden. And this, of course, made a huge amount of information flow about Sweden. At the same time, we had another narrative that we saw. If we can also craft this down to different languages. And when we looked at in Arabic, we got one of those alerts that I was talking about. In that alert, it said that Sweden is kidnapping Muslim children. So there were an actor, which was really an influencer person, that spread information about Sweden kidnapping Muslim children. So it came in the same time as this, of course, vast information about the burning of the Holy Quran in Sweden. And we could see that the narratives that were spread about Sweden here were quite harming for brand Sweden. Our official channels also got many, many questions. Why can you do this in Sweden? Is this okay? Who grants the permit to burn the Holy Quran? Can you burn the Quran but not the Torah? Can you burn the Quran but not the Bible? All of those questions were directed to our official channels. So we could use this information to craft different answers to that question. Our role is to provide information, and we can also direct them to the police, for example, who are the authority who grants the permits to demonstrate in Sweden. And this is, of course, very a question where values, freedom of speech, clashes into values of freedom of religion. So it's a very hard question to talk about in that small forum of social media. So we also get insights on another level, tactical level. Okay, we need to talk more to people in Muslim countries. How can we craft a dialogue when we know that this is the narrative that is spread about Sweden? So this is, if you look at, as I said, in the Global Soft Power Index, Sweden is ranked at number 12. It's very positive. But if you dig into the details, what are the things that people will be affected by if you hear about burning of the Holy Qurans in Sweden? It's about tolerance and inclusiveness. If I go to Sweden, would I be tolerated? Would I be included in the Swedish society? So this is a way of using that data. So we have 3 or 4 different countries where we, in the monitoring, could see that the information about burning of the Holy Quran and abducting children is mostly spread. So we chose those countries, and we did our own research where we asked people, okay, have you heard about this? Because just because you read something in social media or in media doesn't mean that it's spread to the public. But in a study that we did, 1 of 3 people had heard about the burnings of the Holy Qurans in these countries, and 1 of 5 had heard about the narrative that Sweden is abducting children. Of course, we planted that information when we asked the question, but it's of course something that is quite vast when it comes to spread of information. This was really a lot of information spread about Sweden. And we could see also, of course, the results. Sweden dropped on these indicators in these countries, so it had a direct effect. Now we can see that Sweden is really gaining again, so it's a positive outlook. We have done a lot of communication and also relationship building in these countries. But this is an example of how we combine those 2 type of data. We have another issue that we've been looking at. I'm not sure if any of you have heard that we have a problem in the Swedish society with gang crime and violence. So this is a problem that we've seen. If you go back to the graph, you would not see it because this is not something that people talk about in social media. But if you go to the Nordic neighboring countries, if you read the newspapers in the Nordic neighboring countries, this would be something that people talk about. If you go to some parts of the internet, X, in the US, for example, this is also a narrative that we see. And we see this also in Germany, for example, and in the UK. So this leads us to ask the question, okay, so what do people, does this affect the image of Sweden? But if you look at sort of the overall, the overall statistics of the Global Soft Power Index, in Finland we rank number 1 or 2, and same in Denmark and in Norway. So in the overall index, we rank at the top. But if you go to this question, Sweden as perceived as safe and secure. This is, you can see, really shift from 2003 to 2004. And this is, of course, very problematic. In the US, we're ranked at top. We're perceived as the most safe and secure country in the world. In the UK, also, we have very strong positive image in those areas. But when it comes to our neighbors, they think that Sweden is placed on the 72nd place in Finland. This is also a narrative that we saw was very strong in relation to the Finnish election. So when something happens, of course, in Finland, we do know that they started talking about this issue. So this is also something that we can use to inform ourselves. Okay, we need to communicate in the Nordic neighboring countries. We need to put promotion efforts into these countries. And also it needs to inform our brand strategy. Because of course, these 2 issues, that Sweden is tolerant and inclusive and that Sweden is safe and secure, is at the core or the most important thing to attract talent, to attract investments, of course, in Sweden. So this is something that we then use to inform our brand strategy. So over to you, Cecilia.
Thank you. So great to see so many of you here. Very nice to be here. So I will move on a bit to talk about the brand Sweden. If you can then separate the image of Sweden or brand Sweden, it's maybe 2 aspects of the same coin somehow, but we'll talk a bit more about the brand and also Sweden's performance, actual performance. Because the media image is really important to follow, as Sofia said, in order to get an indication maybe of where there are challenges and where should we look at, how Sweden is actually perceived and maybe make communication efforts and so on. Sweden's performance is also another really important aspect and to see to what extent it's in line with how we are perceived. Maybe we were, I don't know, underperforming or performing really well and people don't know about it, or there could be all different kinds of scenarios. I will also talk a bit about some current initiatives, activities, and future initiatives when it comes to branding and communication from Sweden, which are really, I think, exciting. So, well, I don't know how you say this in English, but what's the value of a Swedish brand? I mean, this is obvious to an audience of you. What's the value of brand for a country? That's why we're here, because we think it's important. But just to conclude anyway, Sweden's brand is, of course, very, very important for our competitiveness and growth. And this, I would say, is very, very high on the government agenda and among in the business sector, etc., today. Also, looking back a bit in the mirror the last few years, the image has in some aspects and in some countries been a bit challenged. But of course, our brand will affect whether people would like to choose Sweden for trade, investments, and tourism, and if they choose Swedish organizations as suppliers, business partners, and employers. And this is absolutely crucial that it happens. So, when it comes to our brand, as Sofia mentioned, last year we ranked as number 12 in the Global Soft Power Index among the impressive 193 countries. We'll see about this year. To conclude, we have a competitive brand, especially considering perhaps our size. But even if we wouldn't look at the size, actually, we seem to have a competitive brand. There is also some potential. I mean, of course, as Sofia touched on, to be perceived as safe and secure, tolerant and inclusive, that's like a must everywhere. So there is some potential, I suppose. We can also look at the differences between a few indices that measure actual performance, how Sweden is actually doing. If you look at, GDP, other aspects, and indices that measure the brand. And when we do that, we can see that some of our actual strengths are reflected in the perception, whereas others are not to the same extent, I would say. We think this is a very important exercise also to do. As you can see, our contribution to green transition is really, well, we usually say seems to be part of our DNA, I suppose. This is an image that has been built up over time, where Sweden has been kind of one of the leading countries, perhaps, being early on, detecting the importance of promoting sustainability, etc., or actually working with green transition on the ground. So we both actually perform well in this area, and we have done over time, and we are also perceived to do so. So when we ask, for example, audiences abroad, what do you associate with Sweden? This is usually one of the things that come top of mind, and we perform well as well. Innovation, which seems to listening to the UK team, it was quite interesting. The London team and the UK teams before. Innovation comes. It's been top of mind, of course, for a long time, but it is very attractive, and everyone wants to be a leader in innovation and so on. We can see that Sweden actually performs well in innovation as well. We have a kind of, good circumstances, I suppose, for innovation in many aspects, and creativeness and so on. This is not what is top of mind among audiences abroad. So, I mean, many people before have said it's important not to be complacent. I suppose, we do rank quite well, perception-wise as well. 13 among, again, global soft power, in the Global Soft Power Index. 13 is a strong position, but we do see there is a potential to kind of close this gap anyway. We would like everyone, if you see what I mean, to associate Sweden with innovation. That would be that would make us attractive and lead to good effects in other senses. Again, another example is governance. And we are not unique in this sense. Talking about the UK and many other, strong democracies, governance is an asset. It's really attractive also among the general public in many countries. Also, where there is not democracy to that extent, we can see that it's attractive. And so we perform well in this area, and we are also quite associated with that, and that is important. So, to conclude a bit, we have a strong brand, but we have a challenge that many of you, I suppose, don't have. We're not very well known across, I would say at least, beyond the European borders, with some exceptions, of course. And familiarity, it has also been mentioned a lot, I think, during the morning, is really important. It's important for different reasons. I mean, if you're not well known, then, yeah. No one, I mean, it leads to attractiveness in the best of cases, and we can see that people that do know Sweden, they are usually positive, usually. It's also vulnerability with low levels of familiarity. When something happens, then you might not know, well, is Sweden in fact a tolerant country, or is it actually safe for me if I come or something? If you know a bit more, then I would say that we are a tolerant country. It's of course subjective, but absolutely. If you have knowledge, if you have experienced Sweden, that would usually be your experience. So, to just looking at this picture, our brand is strong or relatively strong, depending on where you are. A bit weaker in, for example, here India or Saudi Arabia. But there is always almost a gap between familiarity and the perception or image. Yeah, some of you might note that Finland, it should be the reversed order. Actually, in Finland, familiarity is absolutely on top, and the image is almost also on top. But yeah, it's so unusual with this opposite situation. So we missed that. Yeah, digging in a bit more than to we would be now be on the we have been on the overall level of the brand. We have also noticed that, of course, you need to dig into country level specifics to look at how Sweden is perceived, and also into themes or whatever. You really have to break down the data. And about the Swedish brand, we can see that we do have some elements that are a bit weaker. And for Sweden, they have to do with cultural elements. And I suppose, yeah, we can say we don't have the Eiffel Tower, or the Westminster Abbey, but it's maybe about something else. Maybe Swedish cultural aspects are not that well known. Or we do see there could be a potential there. Awareness is quite important because, of course, the culture opens doors and, can really, we see the South Korean example, for example, really put a country on the map and raise emotions and so on. It's also important from an industry perspective, of course, creative industries and so on. So here there is some potential. We're not performing bad, we have to say that, compared to our Nordic neighbors, but nonetheless, there is potential. And of course, competitiveness here, competition, I should say, is really harsh or fierce on a global level. So tourism, traditions, gastronomy is maybe where we rank the lowest, actually. Food, I still encourage you to come and try Swedish food, but not so well known, or we think it's because it's not so well known. Actually, cultural heritage and so on, well, there is potential. If we go to somewhat what we say good elements, they tend to be functional. Products and services, innovation, as I mentioned, where we think punch a bit under our weight considering how well we perform, but it's not top of mind, as I said, among foreign audiences with the innovative climate in Sweden, actually, and also some other aspects. Whether it's also a bit of a gap between performance or how Sweden actually is and what we're associated with. And then when we have dug into the data and so on, we can see that the elements where we are really strong brand-wise and also on the ground, if you like. But what is top of mind is actually like these emotional aspects, or it has to do with quality of life, which is also a hard fact, but it's also an emotional aspect. People do think quality of life is really high in Sweden, and that's really attractive. It has to do with modernity, of course, but also equality, and most people do think Sweden is really tolerant and inclusive and so on. The environmental sustainable dimension is there, definitely. Progressive is attractive to many people in the world, that you're kind of forward-leaning, and as Sofia mentioned, if you look at the cultural map on this World Value Survey, we're really, together with the Nordic neighbors, in the right-hand corner when it comes to individualistic and secular values and so on. So this has an appeal in many parts of the world. Yeah, we're usually also seen as quite of a, reliable, trustworthy country. And I've heard, for example, from the business sector in other countries that, well, when you close a deal, with a Swedish company, okay, it might take some time, everyone has to agree and everything, but once you close the deal, it's like forever, if you like. So that's about our brand. And then just move on a bit to where we are now when it comes to strengthening efforts, like current brand efforts. There is a lot going on in this aspect, and we cannot go into details about everything because it's kind of under development, but there are still some things that we can say. About a year ago, the Swedish Institute had a new, we think, very interesting assignment from the government. And this assignment should be seen then again in the context of, the brand, some exceptional events, we can say, in Sweden, and campaigns against Sweden and so on, and where the image has been somewhat challenged. It's even been, leading to security issues. So this assignment to the Swedish Institute should be seen in that light, but also in the light of the importance to reinforce promotional efforts to strengthen trade and competitiveness. Even though, generally there have been challenges, of course, for many economies. Sweden is, things are going pretty well, but nonetheless, it's fierce competition, and this Sweden promotion and the image of Sweden is really now seen as a key element to reinforce competitiveness, I could say. One important part of this assignment, this is actually, a few words about the assignment then, which I touched upon. The purpose is to strengthen Sweden's competitiveness and increase resilience against misinformation and disinformation. I said it in a bit different words, perhaps. And key challenge is, sometimes a challenged image of Sweden, and also that we need to strengthen our competitiveness continuously, basically. So, one part of the assignment is to develop a new strategy for communication about Sweden abroad. And already, I should say, in 2007, some key organizations working with promotion in Sweden developed a communication platform. So something was there, a work that was done to frame strengths and so on. In 2012, a strategy was developed. But I mean, that's, it's a while ago, so some update is needed. What we can say about this, it's been a really interesting process, very inclusive. And that was also important from the government's point of view, that, this is not going to be about a few bureaucrats sitting in an office elaborating a strategy and then, send it out and please use it, into other organizations. But very inclusive process involving many organizations from the private sector, from the public sector. And I have to say, huge interest to participate and like contribute to answering questions like what are Sweden's strengths, you know, what should we communicate and so on. What are the challenges, etc. So this creates, we think, ownership and legitimacy. So yeah, I think about 300 people at least have been involved actually in this process. And we think we cannot go into the specific. The strategy will be launched 29th of April in Sweden, Stockholm. But important elements are really, I mean, the strategy needs to be distinct, somehow, you know, content-wise stand out in a global context. So working on that, business-friendly, build on Sweden's real strengths, and for the business sector also to be able to use it. And they are very interested now. A long-term document strategy, survive different governments, and you know, meet changing conditions over time. So and also contribute to attractiveness for Sweden, of course. So I think we're not talking about a revolution, as I think what maybe someone said sometime, but it's an evolution. But it's a necessary and really important evolution that we're going to look at. So it will be really, I think, interesting to talk maybe about this strategy also at some point. Yeah, and just recapturing, it should really contribute to talent attraction, trade promotion, maybe, you know, cultural exchange, if you like, or yeah, those aspects, and also tourism and so on. This strategy needs to be broad enough to be able to use by different organizations and sectors, and they will, of course, formulate their own like messages and so on. So I think this is like almost the last picture here. We should image. We should allow for some questions as well. Time for that. But another part of this assignment from the government is or was to establish a Team Sweden network or constellation for communication. And Team Sweden is like a concept that has been around, so to say, in Sweden for several years. There are different Team Sweden groups or constellations for, you know, Team Sweden India, Team Sweden. You have different groupings consisting of, for example, Swedish Institute, Visit Sweden, that work with tourism, Business Sweden, that work with investments and trade and so on. So, you know, organizations coming together, working on promotion of Sweden. We're going to run, or we actually are already running now, a Team Sweden communication network. And it consists basically of two parts, you can say. One broad network of about 100 companies and organizations and government bodies and so on, like a broader network, meeting up maybe 2 times a year or something like that. In an, you know, inclusive process where you can still contribute and so on to the implementation, I would say, of the strategy and discuss, you know, current events and so on. And also a smaller group of a national council for the brand of Sweden. And we're really, I would say, happy and proud that, for example, companies like IKEA and Spotify are part of this national council. And also the Sweden's Olympic Committee, sports, you know, great asset, tool, of course, for promotion and so on. And academia, like university, I think Stockholm School of Economics and so on. So a smaller group really working on the core of this, like implementation, if you like, of the strategy and the current events. So they will work with the aim of increasing knowledge about Sweden and increasing interest in Sweden and also trust in Sweden, basically, long term.
Let's move on to questions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now we have a bit, about 10 minutes for questions, if there are any questions. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. hello. I'm Miriam Stern from the Embassy of the Dominican Republic. I had two questions in particular. You mentioned the 10 million data points. Where exactly are you getting that data from? Just from the Google alerts and the and blogs and the such? And the second question is, could you tell me a little bit about your structure regarding funding? Do you receive funding from the central government or from the Foreign Affairs Ministry? Those are the two questions. Thank you so much. And I know a lot about your fermented herring, by the way. That's quite a Visit Sweden one.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So yes, we have a commercial tool that we sort of buy access to. There are many different tools. I'm not going to mention which one we have, but it's quite costly. Maybe you have one of those tools. So we get the data through API. So the tool actually collects data from the platforms and news media, of course. Today we have most of the largest social media platforms. We're missing one very important one, which contains video. So maybe you know which one that is. But we, of course, we get from Meta and X and those large platforms. So that's how we do that. And the second
Budget?
question? The budget, yes. Yes, we're governmental funded. So we get from the state budget annually. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe could you say that the team consists of about 7 people, and we have, what you could call anyway substantial funding. So this is prioritized, you could say.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's maybe good to know as well. Yeah.
I would argue one of your strengths is like the communion of the Nordic countries as a whole. How do you balance your clear desire to like individualize yourselves as Sweden alongside that relationship of like the northern countries and like the tourism towards, the image of the Nordic countries as a whole?
That's a very good question. Of course, I think we share many of those assets with the Nordic countries, and I think there's actually a lot of potential in communicating as a whole. So that is something, of course, that we explore further. I think before maybe we've seen each other as competitors, but I think we're moving towards more sort of unified Nordic region. I think in the expo this year, we have a pavilion, a Nordic pavilion, so we do have some events where we collaborate more. But that is something that we explore, and also I think when it comes to the foreign missions in different parts of the world, I mean in Berlin, for example, we have all the Nordic foreign missions or the embassies at the same place. So locally, I think there's a lot of more cooperation than sort of on governmental level.
Hi, my question is a bit similar to that, but it was like in relation to not the Nordic, but like brand Scandinavia, because brand Scandinavia on its own is quite a strong brand, and obviously it's a strong brand because of what the different countries play into that. So obviously if the Sweden's brand is strong, the Scandinavian brand is strong as well, and you all have like in terms of film and TV, you have co-productions and stuff like that. You have like the Bridge, for instance, where actually you went to the Bridge from Denmark to Scandinavia, so you could actually do like tourism brands on the base of that. So does that play into your thinking, and do you work on that as a sub-issue on brand Scandinavia?
Maybe not so much. I mean, to my knowledge, it's more actually the Nordic brand, I would say now. Maybe not fully aware of all initiatives, but I would say that the Nordic brand, if you like, is more.
I think we've done different studies as well where we've asked, I mean, which is the strongest brand, Sweden, Scandinavia, or the Nordics? And I think it differs depending on the context. In some context, the Nordic brand is very strong, and in some context, the different nation brands are stronger. So I think that is something that we could also elaborate more on to actually go sort of to different markets and see. I mean, in the US, Scandinavia is going to be a strong brand, for example.
Also depending on issues, right? So if you say food, then maybe Nordic food is higher, but then maybe on sports, Scandinavia might be higher.
Could be that, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Could be like that.
Yep, sorry. Hello. So my question is in terms of the negative branding or criticism or narrative which has been created against the nation brand. So what are the strategies or mode that you counter it?
So we work on many different levels, of course. And one strategy, we don't do debunking, for example, but we do answer questions. So and when it comes to in social media, for example, I think the Swedish Institute has a really important role with our official Sweden accounts, because that's where you go to ask all those questions. Okay, how does this work in Sweden? Is this okay? Why do you do this? And then our role is to have a Q&A and to just answer all those questions. So our colleagues, they actually answered, I think, 200,000 questions last year, just in those social media channels. So that is a very important sort of direct response channels that we have. But another strategy, of course, is long-term. I think it's no coincidence that we have a new mission now from the government to form a new brand strategy, but also to work close with Sweden's competitiveness and resilience. So, I mean, they put competitiveness and resilience in the same sentence. So I think this is something that we see, that trade and promotion and also, of course, national security is sort of intertwined in that sense. So that is also a long-term strategy, to have more relationships and be more open, of course, to trade and those things.
Thank you. Natasha Norman, Institute for Identity. I understand you cannot talk about your strategy yet, but do you find it a challenge that, say, the values of sustainability, innovation, creativity can be veritably claimed by Great Britain, Germany, Austria? So do you address this in any way by perhaps promoting the Swedish way of life or how you do things in Sweden? I mean, what's your way of dealing with this?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're completely right. These attributes can be claimed by many countries. I think the trick might be in combining them with other, perhaps more unique, if you like, or I mean, not saying it's unique, but finding a combination, maybe between innovation and something else that is more where Sweden stands out by combining elements. That could be one way, perhaps.
Yeah, I think when we had this hearing, and also the embassy said that, okay, we've been talking about creativity and innovation, but stability, that's also something that Sweden is. We have a very strong foundation with the democratic system and values and all that, so why don't we combine this into something? So I think that the meeting point with innovation and creativity and the stability, that is something that we want to put forward as not maybe unique as Cecilia. We want to be very humble, but something that we could really stand for.
Was that? Yeah, there was someone. Yeah.
Anna Roshinska, American Council for International Education. I have a question about Team Sweden. Can you elaborate more on that? Is it separate independent unit, or is it placed in MFA, or maybe cross-department unit? Thank you.
Yeah. I think the main difference now is that we have an assignment from the government. So the Swedish Institute will be the sort of governing body for this council, I think it's going to be called. So before we had a council for nation branding, and it was run by the government. So the MFA was running it. So I think that is quite a difference. I think the government wants really to emphasize that this is not sort of only a government issue to work with nation branding and to promote Sweden and to do all this work, that this is actually something that we need to really do in Sweden as a whole. So they really emphasized the inclusive process to get the strategy, but also once we have it, it's something that we, or the government wants everyone to want to use. So that's why I think we're very happy that those strong Swedish brands that Cecilia were talking about, they want to be on board. We've had a lot of interest from enterprises and from universities and from many different type of bodies to really contribute and to be part of the process, and also, of course, once the strategy is finalized, use the strategy and be Sweden when they're abroad.
Could perhaps add that it's maybe to see as a cooperation, so it's not a new organizational body placed in like the Swedish Institute or so it's a collaborative structure.
Yeah.
So, but maybe that was apparent, but yeah.
Nicholas Williams from Wallonia Brussels International. Thank you for the inspiring presentation. I have two questions. You were mentioning the finance. Do you have a figure about that? And the other question is about tolerance, and which is a key aspect for your communication abroad. Is it not a problem from some part of the world? I say America, for instance, which is now more and more not progressive. Is it a problem for you, or is it more the idea to push forward for that communication in that area?
So when it comes to finance, I think I have 7 people working with me. So that is, I have 2 people working with brands and insights. So that's Cecilia. 3 people working with this media monitoring, and 2 people working with perception studies. So I think that is quite good resources. And then, of course, when it comes to actual money to use for the Global Soft Power Index or for these tools, do we have a figure?
Maybe not a precise one, but it's it's enough.
Well, we can talk about that later.
Yeah. And you said also tolerance, and maybe we should say it seemed like it could actually be a problem. I mean, during the crisis that we mentioned. From a security point of view, there were some issues, as you know. I mean, from a business perspective, actually there weren't that many repercussions, actually, because people in the business sector and business partners and so on, they had this, the important knowledge from before, some experience of Sweden and so on. But and we'll see also how this year's, for example, Global Soft Power Index, has Sweden bounced back, or was this very serious, but in the lives of people still something more, temporary. So many things have happened since then, other global issues and so on, and we'll see how much of a challenge it is. It will be really important, of course, to communicate this, of course, to invest in communication about that. And there were some immediate effects, of course, on the ground. Remains to be seen how much of a challenge it will be, but it will be a priority, of course, to communicate that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think time is.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for many interesting questions.